Good morning. What if the next great movement has already begun and almost nobody has noticed it? I've been thinking about that possibility now for days. And if I'm right, I think it has the power to change every conversation we have. Now, I could be completely wrong. These are just simply my observations. But I've been noticing something first within myself. And because of that, I think I've started noticing it around me too. Looking back to where this all began as a little girl, I questioned everything. I was endlessly curious. I wanted to know why people behaved the way they did, how things worked, and why the world was the way it was. That curiosity felt natural. It was simply how I moved through life. But somewhere along the road, something shifted, not all at once, but through little moments. Comments like, "Don't be so silly," or "That's a stupid question." Those words probably weren't meant to hurt me, but they quietly shaped something inside me. They taught me that maybe asking questions wasn't such a good idea. I didn't lose my curiosity, I buried it. And as I buried it, I grew quieter. Instead of questioning, I learned to trust. If someone was an expert, I assumed they knew more than I did. If someone was in authority, I believed they had the answers. I still believe there are many people with incredible knowledge and experience who deserve our respect. But looking back, I can see how I slowly moved from curiosity to quiet acceptance, from exploring to simply listening without questioning. I stayed there for a long time. Then, over the past several years, something began to change again. Not suddenly, quietly, and steadily. I felt my curiosity waking up. I've started asking questions again. This actually started during COVID and the vaccines. I think a lot of us have started questioning things then. And I, when I started asking questions again, it's not because I want to argue, and it's not because I think everyone else is wrong. It's because I genuinely want to understand. This time it feels different, more intentional, more grounded. I've noticed something about the way I learn now. First, I hear an idea, then, almost without realizing it, life seems to start putting that idea in front of me. I begin noticing patterns. I find myself wondering if there's more to it than I first thought. Then I start testing it, sometimes without even realizing I'm doing it. I might ask myself, what happens if I say no? What if I try this differently? Am I capable of more than I thought? Somewhere along the way, I stopped listening only with my ears. I started watching. I started noticing, and eventually I began to feel whether something is true for me or not. Not because someone told me it was true, but because I've lived with it, because I've experienced it, and because I've tested it on my own life. That really feels very different. I used to think asking questions meant I didn't know enough. Now I think asking questions are how I learn. That shift from silence back to curiosity has changed everything. It didn't stay as an idea, it showed up in my life. After my mini strokes, I asked one simple question. What if I just started walking? I had no idea that one question would eventually lead me to planning a walk across Spain at 68 years old. One small question changed the direction of my life. Reflecting on that experience, it makes me wonder if that's how meaningful change often begins. Not with certainty, but with curiosity. When I look back through history, it seems we move through seasons. Sometimes we search for certainty, sometimes freedom, sometimes security, and perhaps sometimes we begin searching for understanding. Not someone else's understanding, but our own. Which brings me back to the thought I started with. What if the next great movement isn't political at all? What if it's curiosity? Ordinary people quietly asking better questions. Not to prove anyone wrong, but because they genuinely want to understand. In my own experience, every time I ask a genuine question, something interesting happens. Someone shares an observation I hadn't considered. Someone else tells me a story from their own life. Another person sees it completely different. Before I know it, I'm learning. Not because someone convinced me, because together we've explored something from different directions. There's something beautiful in that. The more honest I am about not having all the answers, the more honest other people become. The more transparent I am about what I'm still trying to understand, the more transparent they become with me. It's almost as though saying, I don't know, but I've been wondering. Give someone else permission to wonder too. I love that. Because curiosity doesn't demand agreement. Curiosity invites exploration. And I can't help wondering, what would happen if more of us lived that way? If more of us became comfortable saying, I don't know. Help me to understand. Or here's something I've been noticing. Would honesty come more easily? Would transparency naturally grow? Or would it become harder for dishonesty to survive if enough ordinary people asked thoughtful questions and listened just as thoughtfully to the answers? I don't know. I'm simply exploring, and that's exactly the spirit I want this channel to have. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to share what I've been noticing. Some of my observations may be completely wrong, And I'm okay with that, because sometimes I would rather be wrong, because this isn't about proving who's right. It's about learning together. Some of the greatest lessons I've ever learned came from people who simply saw life differently than I did. That's why I treasure these conversations so much. The older I get, the more I realize I'm not becoming someone new. I'm uncovering the curious little girl I once was. Maybe that's the movement I've been sensing all along. Not one built on certainty, one built on curiosity. One honest question. One observation. And one conversation that you question, one person at a time. So perhaps the next great movement has already begun. Not in government buildings, and not on television. Not because millions of people suddenly agreed. Maybe it begins with one person sitting quietly with a cup of coffee, becoming curious enough to ask one honest question. That's where mine began. And maybe that's how every great movement has always begun. Not with everyone agreeing, but with one person becoming curious enough to ask an honest question and another person being curious enough to answer it. If that's true, then maybe the next great movement has already begun. And maybe it's sitting right here over a cup of coffee. Now, before I go, I'd love to ask you one question. What have you genuinely been noticing lately? Not what you've been told, and not what everyone else believes. What have you noticed? I'd really love to hear, because there's a very good chance your observation might help someone else notice something they've never seen before, especially me.